welcome to Book Talk. I am so delighted to welcome you back this week. And today we are going to be talking about one of my favorite time periods, World War II, with some of my favorite people. I have my really great writing friend, Sarah Sundin here, and one of my new writing friends, Amanda Barratt. And these two write some of the most beautiful World War II stories. And you know, if you've read any of my books, that I love World War II. It's one of those time periods that I walk around and I see stories because I love that time period so much. And Sarah has been writing World War II for a long time, at least as long as I have. And Amanda is a newer author in this genre, but her stories hit home in a very powerful way. So Sarah, I'll start with you. Do you want to take just a minute to introduce yourself to our listeners?
My name is Sarah Sundin. I write World War II fiction, and I live in Southern California. I'm married. I have three adult children and the cutest grandbaby in the world, says every grandmother ever, and just having so much fun with the grandmothering thing. And we
That
have two
pumpkin photo,
dogs.
that
Oh my gosh. Yes. My I have a pumpkin costume that I made for my kids, and my daughter-in-law dressed my grandson in it, and it's just oh,
yeah,
it's cutie.
it's
So
adorable.
yeah. So yeah, we I volunteer at my church. I teach Sunday school, and I'm leading a table for our women's Bible study. And we're new to our area. We just moved from Northern California a year ago, so just getting used to the area and that's making
Yeah, that's
friends.
a challenge. Anytime you move, especially a distance, it could just be
Yeah.
such a challenge to kind of get reestablished. Now, Amanda, tell us a little bit about you and how you got into writing.
So I have always loved my love of writing grew out of my love for reading, and I began falling in love with reading around the age of 4, and I began loving writing as a teenager when I discovered the novels of Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte and Charles Dickens, and I wanted to write stories similar to theirs. I didn't start, pursuing publication until years later, and I didn't start pursuing writing World War II until I came across the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his fiancee Maria von Wedemeyer. A lot of people know Dietrich Bonhoeffer as like a pastor and an anti-Nazi resistor, and he was executed tragically right before the war ended. But a lot of people don't know that he was engaged at the time, and he was engaged to a woman who was much younger than him and who was an extremely extraordinary person in her own right. And so I set out to write that novel to illuminate her story. And I've always loved World War II, been fascinated, been intrigued by the stories of ordinary people in these dark times, fell in love with the Diary of Anne Frank as a young girl, and that was really something that impacted me and spurred on a lifelong love of that time period. And my most recent World War II novel is The Warsaw Sisters, and that is set in World War II Poland. And I live in Michigan and live in the woods, love being able to take walks in the woods. That always inspires my creativity. And so when I'm not buried in mounds of research books, I like to do that. And I enjoy spending time with my family.
I love it. And I think that all of us find our creativity in different ways. But what I really enjoy about both of your books is you've got these international locations. And I've written two books now, I guess, two books that are set in international locations. And they have their own challenges, and you're not just writing a story. Now you're setting it in a location that has its own culture, its own language, the geography is different, just everything is different and unique. So why did you pick the added challenges of going into foreign locations? So Amanda, I'll start with you, because it's never easy to write a book, but when you add in that complexity of the international dynamic, it just adds not even one layer, it adds like multiple layers. So why did you decide that, okay, this is what I'm going to write?
So I have always been fascinated by Europe, the European theater of World War II. That's always been my area of intrigue. Like I said, in discovering the Diary of Anne Frank, Holocaust stories have always been something I've been really passionate about researching. And this story grew out of my last novel, Within These Walls of Sorrow, which was also set in Poland. And when I discovered, the stories, there were so many stories of the Polish resistance and ordinary Polish people. And so that novel really grew out of this one. I'm also the great granddaughter of Polish immigrants, so I have this special affinity for Polish history and culture. I grew up, hearing those stories about, my ancestors and things like that. So it's really was inspiring to research. In Poland, especially, I feel like there are resistance, like the French resistance and other resistance narratives have been told a lot more. In Poland's story is kind of still in the shadows and not as well known. And so I really wanted to be able to explore that, to bring out those heroes, and there are so many of them.
I love that. And that's actually a great segue to the kind of stories that you've been writing lately, Sarah, because you started with a Homefront series and then you've kind of moved across the ocean, but still with American heroes. But in the last few books, you've really focused more on Europe. And the book prior to Embers in the London Sky focused on the Danish story, which was fascinating because kind of like Poland, we don't really think about what was going on in Denmark. And then this one, you've got the idea of what was going on in the Netherlands, but then you're tying it to England. So you've got all kinds of different settings. So how did you decide to move from the home front, where you actually were in California originally, and now you're like hopscotching all over Europe?
Partly was almost a market decision, and looking what was selling in the mainstream World War II market, which was European set stories and not as much home front stories. So I thought, well, and I had been playing with an idea for modifying my grandfather's story, and he was a German exchange. He was an exchange student of German in Germany in the 30s, and so that was fascinating to me. So I that eventually became my next book, When Twilight Breaks, and I had also glommed onto the idea of the Danish story. I read about the story of the rescue of the Danish Jews, and it was astounding. And most people hadn't heard about it, and I want to tell the story. And so then I came up with the idea of the Americans in Paris in World War II. So for that, with that 3-book contract, and I just loved writing those books. And so for my next 3 books, we're working on 3 Dutch cousins who come to United Kingdom in various ways for various reasons. So this is the first one. They're pretty much entirely set in Britain. Embers in the Sky, obviously by the title, is mostly set in London during the Blitz. And but yeah, it's fascinating when you're studying all these different things. Like, we know the story of what the Germans did in World War II, but in each country it was completely different. What Amanda's studying, what happened in Poland, was not what happened in France, and it definitely wasn't what happened in Denmark, and it wasn't what happened in the Netherlands. So each country had a unique experience. The Germans, they said they behaved themselves in Denmark, especially. They thought the Danes were fellow Aryans, so they treated them really well up until a few years into it, and they realized that the Danes, like, we're not doing this anymore, and they started resisting. But I had a lot of pushback on that. Like, well, we know the Germans were evil and they did evil things. Yes, they did. But at first, they didn't act like that in Denmark. So the thing is, you have to understand each nation had a different experience, and each people group within the nation had a different experience. So really getting to know, and even in France, each region had different stories. So, really getting into there. And then, as you said, getting to know the language, the culture, each culture has different eating practices, and how they use language, and even how they communicate with each other. So just kind of trying to understand these things as best I can, not being French or British or Danish, and being American.
Exactly.
And I'm a typical American white person who has, if you go back to my family tree, it's pretty much everything in Europe. So I'm a mishmash. So I just wanted to try to understand these cultures, and very interesting writing Embers in the London Sky. We think of the English as our, pretty much, we're almost identical, and you really get deep into their culture. Like, they are so different than Americans, and they're the first to say it, I'm sure. They're probably very happy about that. So you're really getting to understand how the British relate, and how they, just the different customs of, what you talk about and what you don't talk about. And I'm just trying to really explore that a little bit, and explaining it for my American read. Most of my readers are American. Just kind of explaining that, illuminating that culture. But it's just so much fun.
It is. And it's one of those that I think it can be really fun because it can be like traveling in a book, and that could be really great. But at the same time, enough of our readers have traveled that if you don't get it right, they will let you know. And so, what was the most challenging part of the research? Because I know, like when I wrote Shadowed by Grace, I got the contract when I was in Germany, but I didn't get to travel to Italy until after the book came out. So, yes, I've spent 4 summers in Italy, but it was after the book came out. So, after the fact, I could be like, oh, yeah, I did a great job with the research. But while I was writing the book, I was sitting in my office in a computer or at a computer in Indiana. And readers would be like, wow, you must have traveled there a lot. And I'm like, hee hee. And nope, it was only after the fact that I could go and see it and do all that. So, what was the most challenging part of researching? So, Sarah, for you in particular, Embers in the London sky.
Well, I think fortunately I have been to London quite a few times, so I really feel comfortable with London. And I've written in a couple books where London was either the setting or a side setting where the characters visited London. So COVID interfered with my plans for my last 3 books. I wasn't able to visit Denmark. That was hard because once again,
Yeah.
completely different culture I was not familiar with. So I just had to research my tail off. For London, I think the big thing for me is understanding the way I experience London is not how my characters experience London,
Yes.
because they're there during the Blitz. A lot of things we see there don't exist. A lot of the things that they saw no longer exist. And obviously, buildings were destroyed. So I need to describe, the rubble on the street and obviously during the Blitz, it wasn't like, the bombs fell evenly, one per borough or anything. So, certain areas were hit harder on different nights. So trying to get that as accurate as I can as far as which areas were hit and just life during the Blitz. But yeah, that was a lot of fun and very interesting. And fortunately for me, London during the Blitz is a very well written about area of time. So there's lots of materials for me to work with, much more than some of the other regions I've written about. Or it's really, you have to really pull teeth to find materials. But London during the Blitz, there's a wealth. You can't possibly read all the information that's out there. Primary sources, personal accounts, secondary sources, it's all there. So that part made it easy, and as well as being familiar with London. But once again, try to portray it as it was at that time, not as I know it.
And that is the challenge, because even when we're online or we're looking on Google Earth or we're walking the roads, we're seeing, and we have to constantly remind ourselves, is this the way the roads went then? And matching things up. And I remember the first time I was in Europe and I was so disappointed. I'm like, there's no evidence of the war. And people were like, that was 60 years ago. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm trying to imagine, how it looked and where it is. So Amanda, for you, as you were writing the Warsaw Sisters in particular, was there something that happened during the book where you were like, I don't know how I'm going to research this, or something that really surprised you as you were doing the work?
Well, Warsaw was destroyed. Over 80% of all buildings were leveled at the end of the war. So it was really that. So the geography, thankfully, there are some amazing maps from the time period. So I was able to really access those. I think the hardest thing was that it is one of those settings, like Sarah said, where it's pulling teeth to try to find those sources in English. There's a lot more in Polish, but I unfortunately don't speak enough Polish to be able to read things. So there were some sources I simply wasn't able to access because of that. But I got really good at using some really good translation apps to type different things in to gather the meaning. And then there are some really wonderful firsthand accounts, memoirs, letters about different things that happened in Warsaw during the war. So I was able to access those. For the project, I think I read around 100 different nonfiction titles and memoirs and firsthand accounts and things like that that were really helpful in gaining, not only the panoramic perspective, the entire history, but also those deeply personal experiences of individuals and families. And those are the stories that I'm always most drawn to, just the snapshot, what is this one person's life? And those are often when I find the things that become scenes, that become plot lines. And those are always just really amazing.
It is amazing when you can find those kind of firsthand sources. And then that's where I'm just getting ready to put Shadow by Grace out again and going back through the edits and looking at it. And I hired someone to do the line edits, and she was like, I can't find a source for this and I can't find a source for that. And I'm like, I had a source for that. And most of the time, and that book was 10 years, I wrote it 10 years ago. And I was like, here's the source for that. And here's the source for that. And here's the source for that. Cause I'm like, it was so heavily researched. And I'm like, I was finding all of these things in different books. It's not on the web. It's in those sources. So what's an unexpected joy for you as you're writing? Because writing's a lot of work, and especially historical, when you care so deeply about getting the history and the details right, like you two do. You're writing these stories that are illuminating a really difficult time. And I was thinking about this yesterday as I was preparing for this interview. We've got the Ukraine war, we've got the Israeli-Palestinian war that just erupted this week as we're getting ready to record this. And I was just thinking about, there's all these people who now in different parts of the world are experiencing war. And that's what was happening during World War II. It was this all over the world, people were experiencing the trauma of war. And when we're researching it, when we're writing it, we're stepping into those shoes. And so it can be hard, it can be heavy. So how did you have unexpected moments of joy popping out as you were writing or doing research for these particular stories? So Amanda, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think that, yes, there is. It was very dark to spend months and months immersed in Poland during the war with both of these books. I mean, that was, there was so much darkness there, but there also were these ordinary people who did extraordinary things and who dared to be a light, and I think that, I love the quote that Miep Gies, who hid Anne Frank, she says that anyone can be a small light. And I think that I counted so many of those stories, and that really just kindness, people providing a moment of decency, a moment, offering to hide a Jewish person, offering to, join the resistance and fight for freedom. These are all these things that are hope in the midst of darkness. They're, hope in humanity, hope that, that there is still good. And so encountering these stories throughout the research process, it really was a joy, and not only a joy, but an inspiration to me as I consider my own life and think, in what ways can I make a difference?
I love that. And when I was in Berlin last year, one of the museums that I went to was the Resistance Museum. And sometimes when you're walking around Berlin and, when you think about World War II, I'm walking through like the Holocaust Museum and things like that. And it can be really heavy. You're walking around and on the sidewalk, you see the little plaques that illuminate and remind us where Jews and other people were taken from their homes or their apartments. But walking through the Resistance Museum, and again, it's the same idea, all the stories of the different people who were part of resisting Hitler and the Nazis. And it was so inspiring, because often we focus on the evil that was rampant, but there were also lots of people in Germany who were actively resisting in different ways. And so I love that you were able to find those stories throughout Poland. So Sarah, as you were working on Embers in the London Sky, where did you find those moments of joy?
Well, actually, in my characters, once again, a little darker story, not nearly like Amanda's. I read it for endorsement. It is phenomenal. It will break your heart and then put it back together again. But mine deals with the Blitz. It deals with a woman who's been separated from her 3-year-old son, and she's searching for him, not knowing where he is. So as a mom, that just tore my heart out. And then I have a murder mystery. So I have people who are dying who are close to the hero and the heroine. So I'm not a big fan of the murder mysteries. It was like, oh, somebody died, ha ha ha, let's go on. Like, no, I wanted to explore how hurtful it is, how painful it is. So I've got death and a lot of stuff going around, but I found a lot of light in my characters, especially the hero, Hugh Collingwood, who is a BBC reporter, and he's just funny, and he just has a light way about him. He loves people. He loves bringing out their stories, and he just says funny things. And I really enjoy getting into that British sense of humor. And he ends up adopting a cat who's a little bit of a sourpuss, if you would. And so there was a little bit of humor with the cat. So That's where I found my joy with this particular, each novel is a little different.
Yeah.
But with this one, I really had fun with, especially writing Hugh when came on stage, and he was fun to write. I ended up slipping him into my next book. He's a BBC reporter, so he can go anywhere, and he interviews the hero in the book I'm writing right now. Like, because I just loved Hugh and I wanted him back again.
I love that. And I love it when characters do that. And they're just like, we're going to surprise you and we're going to do something fun. And then you're like, oh, I'm going to use you again. That's awesome.
My critique partner's like, Hugh's
back again. That's awesome. So when you're writing, what's your writing schedule look like? Because I don't know, like for me, I've got to start writing like crazy because my next book is due in January. I haven't even started it yet. My semester's been insane. So what's it like for you? How do you find time to write around life? Sarah, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm thankful. I used to work part-time as a pharmacist. I no longer do so. So my life is full-time, and I don't have kids at home anymore. So my life is full-time writing. But I found I'm not a morning person. I'm barely functional before lunch. So I do all my businessy stuff in the morning. I co-direct a writers conference. So I do all that kind of stuff in the morning. And I try to reserve my afternoons for my creative time. And then in the evenings, I have, it's reserved for my husband and all that. But my afternoon, I guard them pretty carefully to be my writing time. Right now, the West Coast Christian Writers Conference starts on Wednesday and it is Friday. So we're talking 5 days, and I'm getting in the car on Tuesday. So right now it's last minute stuff. So it's all conference all the time. But I'm dying to get back to my story. But in general, that's how I work. Oh, I don't know, 50, 60 hours a week. But I generally found that's what works for me. I know a lot of writer teachers who say you have to write first thing in the morning. Well, I can barely pour my coffee first thing in the mornings. I don't dare try to do anything creative. So you have to, if writers need to find their best creative time, that obviously works with their personal schedule. People who are working full time or have kids, you've got to work around that. But you guard that zealously.
I love that. That's great advice. Amanda, how about you? How does your schedule work?
Well, I love that Sarah says she's not a morning person, because I know so many writers who like get up at 5 a.m. to write, and that's amazing, but that is not me. My brain just could not function to form words, at that hour. So I do write more first things. For me, that would be more starting at like 9 or 10, but not super early, so I can actually, think and be ready and, have, had devotions in the morning and had breakfast and stuff, and then sit down. And for me, I will write usually through most of, depending on the day, through mid-afternoon to late afternoon, depending on my deadline. When I'm on deadline, I think, as most writers know, it's you work in every spare minute, just to try to get that project done. But yeah, I work typically, at least 5 days, if not 6 days a week when I'm on deadline, just trying to do that. But I have a lovely vintage office, so I'm able to go in there and shut the door and tune out all those distractions. And just a lot of my writing day is not only spent writing, but researching, if I'm stuck in a detail in a scene and I just want to take a little time to, see if I can find more information about that, then I'll do that too. So that accounts for sometimes like, an 8-hour writing day. Well, maybe only like 6 of those hours are actually writing.
Yeah, because sometimes that getting that detail can be really important. I've been known to drop a footnote and say, come back to it, or give myself a comment, because I'm like, I got to keep writing. I got to get those words down. Okay, so last question for each of you. What is one thing, if you could go back in time and think about when you first started writing, what's one thing you would tell your younger writing self? So Amanda, we'll start with you. What would you tell yourself if you could go back and you were just starting?
I think I would tell myself that writing is a journey, and things that I thought would go away becoming published have not. The insecurity is still there. The imposter syndrome is still there. Those things don't stop, no matter how many contracts, no matter how many awards, that continues. So I would also just say, that you write for the love of it. That's what I would always tell a writer, right? Because you have these stories on your heart that you cannot not share. Write the books that you feel like you can't find, that are not on the shelves, that you would like to read. read, write the stories where that's your passion, where that's your heart, because those are the stories, even if you have to wait a while, for that publication, if it's not the time for that story, just write it, because it's what you're called to do. And, trust the Lord. He's the author of all of our stories, and his timing is perfect. And so I would always encourage people, I would encourage my younger self, and, encourage writers today just to trust him and trust the author of our stories.
I love that. That's such great advice. Sarah, what would you tell your younger writing self?
Can't improve on much of what Amanda said. So much of that. I think what I would tell myself is relax, take a deep breath. I was so anxious about getting published, and that consumed me. And I had 5 years of rejection letters, and I had another job that paid well, and so there was a lot of pressure, like, well, why are you even trying to do that when you already have a great job that pays a lot better than writing? And so I felt like, well, I have to be published so that I can do this thing I love, and so I can justify spending all this time on my writing. And I do, as I said, I teach a lot of writers conferences. I co-direct a writers conference, and I spend a lot of time with very anxious, very driven writers who feel like if they don't get a contract today, they'll self-publish tomorrow because it has to be done. It has to be done now. And I want to say to them, as I want to say to my past self, relax, take a deep breath, learn the craft. You don't become a physician overnight. You don't become a lawyer overnight. You don't become a pharmacist overnight. You don't even become a mother overnight. For heaven's sakes, you need time and training, and it's okay. Relax, learn the craft well, and attend conferences. And when you're doing those things, you're also learning about the industry, and God is doing important things in your heart. I thought I was ready in 2003 to be published. My writing may or may not, I'm looking back at it, probably not ready to be published, but I was not ready to be a published author. God needed to do some serious work in my heart, teaching me a whole lot of humility. And rejection letters are a wonderful way to teach you humility. And I needed that as an author. So I would not go back and ditch those rejection letter years at all, because I learned about the industry. So when I did get my first contract, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I knew exactly what things were going to be required of me. And I was able to hit the ground running because I had those years of going to conferences and meeting professionals and understanding, having long talks with published authors, thinking that was not my purpose for the conference, but it really was, because they were telling me about what they do, and that was teaching me. So yeah, I would just say, relax, enjoy the learning process, enjoy what God's doing in your heart.
I love that. Such great advice from both of you. And I love both of these books. So Embers in the London Sky and The Warsaw Sisters, both set in World War II, very different, but both fantastic stories that'll pull at your heartstrings and really sweep you back in time to an important time period. Thank you both so much for joining me today. It was such a pleasure to have you on Book Talk.